Hello students, welcome to our first module of class 8 history, our past 3, chapter 8 women, caste and reform. In this module, we will discuss about the condition of women 200 years ago and how the changes were being brought about in the lives of women in the colonial period. So let us begin. Have you ever thought of how children lived about 200 years ago? Nowadays, most girls from middle class families go to school and often study with boys. On growing up, many of them go to colleges and universities and take up jobs after that. They have to be adults before they are legally married, and according to law, they can marry anyone they like from any caste and community, and widows can remarry too. All women, like all men, can vote and stand for elections. However, 200 years ago, things were very different. Most children were married off at an early age. Both Hindu and Muslim men could marry more than one wife, that is polygamy. In some parts of the country, widows were praised if they choose to do that by burning themselves on the funeral pyre of their husbands. Women who died in this manner, whether willingly or otherwise, were called sati, meaning virtuous women. Women's right to property were also restricted. Besides, most women had virtually no access to education. In many parts of the country, people believed that if a woman was educated, she would become a widow. But things started gradually changing in the 19th century. From the early 19th century, we find debates and discussions about social customs and practices taking on a new character. One important reason for this was the development of new forms of communication. For the first time, books, newspapers, magazines, leaflets, and pamphlets were printed. All kinds of issues, whether it be social, political, economic, and religious, could now be debated and discussed by men and sometimes by women as well. The discussions could reach out to a wider public and could become linked to movements for social change. These debates were often initiated by Indian reformers and reform groups. One such reformer was Raja Ram Mohan Roy. Raja Ram Mohan Roy was the pioneer of the reform movement. He is also called the father of modern India. He started 2 newspapers in Bengali and in Persian. Through his writings, he tried to convey that the practice of sati had no sanction in ancient texts. Raja Ram Mohan Roy was against idol worship, ritualism, and superstitions. He wanted to free Hinduism from all these evils. With this aim, he established the Brahmo Sabha in 1828. It was renamed the Brahmo Samaj in 1829. He worked for the abolition of religious conservation, polygamy, child marriage, rigid caste system, untouchability, parda system, and above all, the practice of sati. He also advocated women's right to inherit property. It was because of his sustained efforts that in 1829, the Governor General Lord Banting issued a regulation by which sati was declared illegal. Another great social reformer of the 19th century was Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar. He protested against child marriage. He also campaigned against polygamy. His most important contribution to the upliftment of women was widow remarriage. It was not an easily acceptable idea for the society of the 19th century. For this, he had to face bitter enmity of the Orthodox Hindus. His efforts resulted in the enactment of the Widow Remarriage Act of 1856. The first lawful Hindu widow remarriage among the upper caste in India was performed in Calcutta in December 1856 under the care of Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar. Swami Dayanand Saraswati, who founded the reform association called Arya Samaj, also supported widow remarriage. Yet the number of widows who actually remarried remained low. There were many women reformers who wanted to change the status of women in our society. Let us discuss about some of those women. Begum ROKEYA SAKHAWAT HOSSAIN. From the early 20th century, Muslim women like the Begums of Bhopal played a notable role in promoting education among women. They founded a primary school for girls at Aligarh. Another remarkable woman, Begum ROKEYA SAKHAWAT HOSSAIN, started school for Muslim girls in Patna and Calcutta. She was a fearless critic of conservative ideas, arguing that religious leaders of every faith accorded an inferior place to women. By the 1880s, Indian women began to enter universities. Some of them trained to be doctors, some became teachers. Many women began to write and publish their critical views on the place of women in society. Tarabai Shinde, a woman educated at home at Pune, published a book, Tulna, that is, a comparison between women and men, criticizing the social differences between men and women. Pandita Ramabai, a great scholar of Sanskrit, felt that Hinduism was oppressive towards women and wrote a book about the miserable lives of upper caste Hindu women. She founded a widows' home at Pune to provide shelter to widows who had been treated badly by their husbands' relatives. Here, women were trained so that they could support themselves economically. As you can see now, that by the end of the 19th century, women themselves were actively working for reform. They wrote books, edited magazines, founded schools and training centers, and set up women's associations. With the growth of women's organization and writings on these issues, the momentum for reform gained strength. People challenged another established custom, that of child marriage. There were a number of Indian legislatures in the Central Legislative Assembly who fought to make a law preventing child marriage. In 1929, the Child Marriage Restraint Act was passed without the kind of bitter debates and struggles that earlier laws had seen. According to the Act, no man below the age of 18 and woman below the age of 16 could marry. Subsequently, these limits were raised to 21 for men and 18 for women. Let us summarize what we have learned today. 200 years ago, the lives of women were totally different from what it is today. There were many restrictions imposed on women. Many reformers felt that to improve the condition of women, education for girls was necessary. Women started working for reforms. They wrote books, magazines, founded schools and training centers, and set up women's associations. Let us see what you have grasped today. Here are some questions for you. Your question number 1 is, which among the following is not a social evil? And the options are A. Child marriage, B. Widow remarriage, C. Sati system, or D. Parda system. The correct answer is B. Widow remarriage. The question number 2 is, when was Sati Pratha banned? The options are A. 1899, B. 1947, C. 1901, or D. 1829. And the correct answer is D. 1829. Your third question is, in the year dash Widow Remarriage Act was passed. The options are A. 1847, B. 1910, C. 1856, or D. 1860. The correct answer is C. 1856. The fourth question is, who among the following wrote the book Tulna? The options are A. Pandita Ramabai, B. Tarabai Shinde, C. ROKEYA SAKHAWAT HOSSAIN, or D. Raja Ram Mohan Roy. The correct answer is B. Tarabai Shinde. It's practice time now. Here is some homework for you. The question number 1 is, why people such as Ram Mohan Roy are described as reformers? Your question number 2 is, who published the book named Tulna? What is it about? The question number 3 is, what do you mean by Sati? The question number 4 is, why were changes necessary in Indian society? In our next module, we'll discuss about caste and social reform. Till then, take care of yourself, stay home, stay safe. Thank you.